Welcome back, Beyond Rome listeners, to season 2, finally, of, of this podcast. And I'm so excited to have with me today Peter Wolfgang. Peter, welcome to Beyond Rome.
Simone, thank you for having me on. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. And Peter, among many things, is the executive director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. So Peter, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do out in Connecticut?
Sure. So the Family Institute of Connecticut is a pro-life, pro-family organization, pro-religious liberty. I'm sitting here right now in my office in Hartford, Connecticut, a stone's throw from the state capitol. And our acronym FIC, what FIC is we are one of the family policy councils that exist in about 40 of the 50 states. Our organization is ecumenical. I myself am Catholic, but our origins go back to the founding of Focus on the Family, which is an evangelical Protestant organization ministry in Colorado Springs. It was founded by Dr. James Dobson, who is a child psychologist and a Church of the Nazarene minister. He founded it in the mid-1970s. He was very concerned at the time about what was already the crisis in family life in America, which back then meant divorce and abortion. Of course, it's metastasized since then. But by the end of the 1980s, Focus on the Family realized that a lot of these battles were going to be won or lost on the state level. So they encouraged the founding of what are called family policy councils, FPCs. And so FIC is the FPC for Connecticut, and we're all independent and autonomous and responsible for raising our own funds. But we're in about 40 of the 50 state capitals. We're networked in together loosely through Focus on the Family. There's another organization called Family Policy Alliance, which is the organization that links us all together. They're the ones that put on like conferences in the summertime for us to get professional training for how to do our jobs. If you've heard of the Family Research Council, they're like our de facto Washington arm. Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, is our legal arm. And so those are our players on the national level. Most people have probably heard of those groups. But what you may not know is, depending on which state you're in, there's a local group at your state capitol that fights these sorts of battles in the halls of power in your own state. So you should Google Family Policy Council in whatever state you're in and get involved in yours. And our website, if you're in Connecticut, is ctfamily.org. And I often say, Simone, that Family Institute of Connecticut, we have a sort of niche beyond just being from Connecticut, because a lot of times what the cultural left does, the national left, is they come up with some crazy new idea and they treat Connecticut as like their petri dish, their lab experiment.
Interesting.
And because they try it here first, they figure, well, if we can't even get it past Connecticut, it's not going to fly in the South or the Midwest. So if we stop them in Connecticut, we're saving the whole country. And if we fail to stop them in Connecticut, then it's open season on the rest of the country. And we've seen this with a number of the issues that we work on. So ctfamily.org and myself, so that's Family Institute. Myself, I am a Connecticut native, born and raised, cradle Catholic my whole life. I was a young man of the left growing up in the state of Connecticut. I had the same, mostly secular values of all my friends growing up. But, my mom is Portuguese Catholic. My dad is Ashkenazi Jew. And they got married. I was born about 1970 or so. And my dad is, like a lot of American Jews, he's very secular. He's not hostile, but just kind of indifferent to religion. So he had no problem with my mom raising us Catholic, my two brothers and me. And we were Christmas and Easter Catholics for about the first 16 years of my life. I, on my own, when I was going to confirmation, that's when I started going to Mass regularly every Sunday, and my faith sort of deepened from there. And even though I had gone to CCD, I made all the sacraments. I'm almost like a revert or a convert, because I sort of read my way into the faith that I already had. When I was in college, I started reading Catholic periodicals and all the writers that they recommend, all the great intellectual treasures of the church. which growing up in the 70s and 80s, they didn't teach you about any of this stuff
Yeah.
in religious ed. So, I discovered John Henry Newman and Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy and Dorothy
Yeah.
Day and on, Jacques Maritain, you name it, Chesterton, Belloc, Evelyn Waugh. I could give a whole other thing on that. But so, I really came to embrace my faith. And one thing is that I mentioned that I was a young man on the left. We protested Mr. Reagan's arms race, what we thought it was when I was in high school. But one thing is, all through my time as a young man on the left, I was always pro-life. And I could
Oh,
not understand how all my liberal friends were on the other side, because we were supposed to be the ones who were
that
on the
cared
side
about
of the,
the
yeah,
social justice and the
yep,
innocent, right?
yep.
Yeah. Oh, how interesting. Do you
So
know why? Yeah, why were you pro-life?
Well, I think there were a couple of things. The faith of my grandparents who
Mm.
were devout Catholics, my grandmother particularly, that was kicking around inside of me. And also just logically, like I bought the liberal argument that, if you're on the side of the underprivileged, the underdog, the vulnerable, you're going to have positions on this, this, and this. And being on the side of the unborn child, to me, just seemed to go naturally with it. I could not understand how my
Right.
liberal friends felt differently. But I thought, Simone, that it was just some sort of intellectual error. If I could just explain to them, no, the
Right.
other guys should be pro abortion, we should be pro life. And then what happened was in the 90s, I was in my 20s at this point, I'm in law school. We had the big fight over partial birth abortion.
Mhm.
And this is so obviously infanticide. The
Yeah.
child is 4/5 out of the womb. And all my friends supported even that gruesome thing. And I think that's what turned me. That's when I went right, both theologically and politically. I started reading deeply into political philosophy, theology, started reading conservative periodicals, which I did not really touch until
Mhm.
my mid 20s. And I kind of come out of the experience. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm a conservative. And yeah, it was shocking.
You came
Um,
out of the conservative
and
closet.
that was while I was at UConn Law School, which was like one of the most secular environments I had ever
Right.
been in, one of the
Yeah.
most liberal. And I met my now wife there. She was an atheist when I met her.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
she was a pro-choice atheist.
Oh
And,
my gosh.
we both
Amazing.
we both had kind of a conversion experience during that time in law school when we were dating. And so we got married right after law school. She became the homeschooling mother of our 7 children, and they're
Amazing.
older now. We've
Yeah.
got a couple grandkids now, and she's
Nice.
actually working for me now at the Family Institute. We were all in. We named. I've got one boy and 6 girls, and we named all our kids after American saints, canonized saints of the United States.
Oh, that's
So
so neat. 6
we
girls? 6
six
girls?
6 girls. I'm a girl dad. Um,
You are.
so we took the saint's last name and made it the child's middle name. So they're Elizabeth Seaton, Catherine Drexel, Isaac Jogues, Rose Duchenne, Frances Cabrini, Marianne Cope, and Theodora Guerin.
Oh my gosh. Nothing says I'm Catholic more than those names for your
Right?
kids. I love that.
Well, you know that the Irish have a tradition of naming their boys Patrick. The
Yeah.
Italians name their boys Anthony.
Right.
There's no tradition of American Catholics naming their daughters after like Saint Elizabeth Seton or something like that. And I wanted to get that
We
going.
gotta be yeah, it's
Yeah,
because I think the Protestant influence in America, we lose kind of the intercession of the saints. Like, it's coming back more, but it's not as because you don't see it the way you see it in Europe everywhere. Even if you're kind of secular, you see churches and saints and statues everywhere, but
right.
here you don't, so it's easy to forget.
So we try to celebrate the child's name days. You're right. I mean, we have a very Protestant culture. I think maybe
Yeah.
Chesterton or someone said
Even the
that
Catholics are
even the
Protestant.
Catholics are Protestant. So here in Connecticut, we're fortunate in that we have Blessed Michael McGivney's body,
Yes,
his
I love
sarcophagus,
him.
right there in St. Mary's Church in New Haven. So we try
Nice.
to get that European Catholic thing going wherever we can.
Even my mom noticed that, she obviously grew up in the Middle East, and she's like, wait a minute, like, we used to be so much more into the saints. And it's not that she ever left the church or asking saints to intercede, but even she kind of felt that
Yeah.
disconnection after a while. But that's really, really neat. And I'll have to ask you this another time, but if their vocations or the work that they've got into has anything to do with the saints that you named them after. So
Well, my oldest is an English teacher at St. Elizabeth
is
Seton.
it Seton? Okay.
She's an English
So it
teacher
did
at
work.
St. Pius X High School in Albuquerque. So,
Okay.
yeah, and
The
she's
influence is there.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's 24. So I mean, we're still seeing what their futures may hold. My youngest is 9, so who knows?
Where's the boy? Is he smack in the middle?
Yeah, he's the third one down. He is a rising senior at Benedictine College
Nice.
in Kansas.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Oh, that's so neat. Well, okay. So I have been so happy to meet you and to collaborate with you on this emerging problem of anti Semitism in the church. I mean, it's one thing to notice it globally and nationally, and that's very concerning because of the cultural crisis that it is. But then when it happens in our church, it's more of our even deeper pain and responsibility. So tell me how you mentioned your dad is Ashkenazi, so you have Jewish family, but tell me, how you got switched onto this, what you started noticing, and why you started writing and speaking about it.
So, in addition to being the head of Family Institute of Connecticut, I got a few side gigs. And for a long time, and still sometimes today, I write a column for a webzine called The Stream, which is like the Family Institute. It's a social conservative publication that combines both Catholics and evangelicals. And I think the first awakening of this for me was an article I wrote for them a few years ago after the terrible mass shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Right.
And it just kind of awakened something in me. So nothing like that at that point had ever happened in U.S. history. Unfortunately, there's been a few more incidents since. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But I wrote an article about how America, next to Israel, America is like the greatest country in history for the Jews, and how lucky we are to have the Jews, how much contribution the Jewish people have made to American culture. I feel that way, frankly, about all the ethnic groups that make up the United States of America. I mean, Hispanic folks, Black folks, Asian folks, everyone has contributed to this beautiful tapestry that is the United States. And I don't mean that in a sort of modern, woke, diversity is our strength way. I mean it in an old-fashioned melting pot, but also maybe a little bit of a tossed salad thing. Like everybody, we all bring the cultural richness of humanity, and what a great country we have. I mean, I think contra so much of the negativity that you hear against the United States, and you and I are filming this on the eve of the 4th of July. Tomorrow is our great national feast day. America is the most successful pluralistic project, I think, in the history of the world. And it's something to celebrate. And the Jewish people are part of that. And, growing up as I have in post-war America, my entire life begins with post-1960s America. So I grew up immediately after the death of Martin Luther King. And, I grew up, frankly, in kind of a sweet spot, I think, of American history, where a lot of the old demons were sleeping. Now, it's been said that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper. And we've learned that. It's waking up. But if you grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you were very fortunate to grow up in a time where I think tolerance was at a peak. Right. And you saw Mel Brooks films.
If that's not part of the American tapestry,
right?
I don't know what is.
Oh my goodness, and is stuff you can never get away with today. But you watched Seinfeld in the 90s, and you enjoyed the racial and ethnic humor of Saturday Night Live. Like there was kind of a sense of we're all in this together, and the Jewish people were so much a part of that. And then you get to what was it now, about 5 or 10 years ago, the terrible shooting in Pittsburgh, and you got a sense that something was alive in the land, something ugly and evil was coming back, something you had only read about in history books. So that to me was the first hint of it. And then there was another shooting shortly after. I only wrote about that one on Facebook, but there was a Presbyterian kid, not the mainline Presbyterian church, but some offshoot of Presbyterianism, shot up a synagogue in California. And he put out this manifesto that was like, it was old school Christian anti-Semitism of a kind that I didn't know existed anymore, but apparently
Right.
it was coming back. It was bubbling back. Now, bringing us up to where we are today, you jump ahead to October 7th. And, it was starting to build. You talked about in your intro about Catholic anti-Semitism. Something was already starting to build, I think, online.
Yep.
But ever since October 7th, it has really taken off, which is mind-blowing to me. And look, in saying this, I don't mean to, I think good people can come down on different sides of the Israel-Gaza war. I appreciate that. I think there's a number of viewpoints that people can have. I don't see how anyone could possibly excuse or play down, and that's where the rubber hits the road, play down the atrocity of October 7th or deny that everything that's happening this last year and a half or so is happening because of October 7th. And if you bring up October 7th and the person on the other side of the conversation wants to change the subject to, well, yes, but there was 1948 and there was 1967. And so it's a way of excusing October 7th. And October 7th, I think, has led to all sorts of deformations in our civic life and in our especially our online conversation with Catholics. And look, I get that among some commentators, there is, I think, an understandable sensitivity about some of the disparaging remarks that can sometimes be said about the Palestinian people, and maybe a misunderstanding among Americans who aren't as familiar with the region, don't understand that, look, a lot of those Palestinians are Christian, they're Catholic, they're Orthodox, or the Oriental churches, the non-Chalcedonian. I get all that. I appreciate all that. But at the same time, I don't think you can downplay. Well, look, I understand that. Here's the thing, though. If there's some disparaging remark being made, it's almost never against the Palestinians. It's almost never in Catholic circles. I don't hear that among Catholics.
I've never heard it.
No.
I honest to goodness, have never heard a disparaging comment about Palestinians ever.
I've got
in the church ever.
I've got 3,000 people on my Facebook, and I can think of maybe one guy out of 3,000, a Catholic guy, who maybe could tone it down a little. But he's the outlier. That may be a thing among evangelicals rooted in a particular theology, but I don't understand articles that are criticizing the Catholic faithful on this. I don't see that among Catholics at all. What I see among Catholics is something very different. And to what extent it's an online phenomenon, or to what extent it's a thing that's really happening on the ground, I don't know. But I do know that the stuff that starts online sooner or later bleeds over into real life, and that it's not too soon to send up the flares, to sound an alarm. And so I mentioned the stream. More recently, I've been writing a weekly or almost weekly column for CatholicCulture.org.
Nice.
And I've written maybe 4 or 5 columns on this since the first anniversary of October 7th, just about maybe 6 or 9 months ago now. And I'm sorry, my voice is going on me. You got to give me a moment here.
Don't worry. Take a break.
I tend to run off at the mouth, and my vocal cords don't always keep up.
It's for the mission. It's for the cause. No,
There
I
we
mean,
go.
those, and we'll link them to this podcast so that people can read those articles. And I would want to ask, like, it hurts me as a Catholic because, again, as you noted, this was something that was emerging before the Hamas attack on Israel, which has been I think in the Catholic community either entirely dismissed or downplayed. And I don't say that in an accusatory way, just in my experience kind of way.
Yeah.
But you're a Catholic from a Jewish background, and I'm having the pleasure of meeting more and more and more Catholics who are of Jewish backgrounds who are concerned in a more personal way,
So here's how that hits me, and you're exactly right. The Nazis had a word for guys like me. We were called mishlings. That's
Mhm.
a first degree hybrid Jew, half breed Jew. We were called a Mishling. And look, I understand among the Jewish people in rabbinical Judaism, a guy like me, technically I'm not a Jew. My mother's Catholic, and I believe in Jesus, which I get the vibe for a lot of Jewish people. That's kind of a deal breaker. Like you can be into a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, you're an
Yeah,
apostate. You're
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But okay, I get that. In the eyes of the Jewish people, I'm not a Jew. In the eyes of the enemies of the Jew, I'm very much a Jew. Um, yeah, I'm a Mishling, and the enemies of the Jewish people are my enemies. And
Mhm.
I would say number one, there's about three different degrees of this, three different levels. I would say number one, even if that were not the case, we ought to care about the persecution and targeting of the Jewish people for its own sake,
For its own sake. Right.
because it's wrong. That's number one. Number two, I do feel, even beyond that, as we just discussed, I do feel like I have a personal stake in this because, regardless of whatever the official thing may be in rabbinical Judaism, on some level, I'm an ethnic Jew. I'm not a Jew, but I kind of am a Jew.
But you are, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, so, I do feel I have a personal stake on this. And here, number three, I would argue, and this is what I argued in the first of about 5 articles for Catholic culture that I've written just since the first anniversary of October 7th. Um, I think we all have a stake in this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because here's the thing. The enemies of the Jews are my enemies because they see me as Jewish. I would go beyond that even and say that to a large degree, the enemies, or to some degree at least, the enemies of the state of Israel are our enemies. They are the enemies of the West, of Western civilization, and of the United States of America, which is the most powerful and robust exemplar in our time of what remains of Western civilization. And I'll break that down for you. I'll tell you what I mean by that, Simone. And it does come back to October 7th.
Yep.
When October 7th happened, let me see if I can get you the exact quote. If you'll excuse me a moment.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure I
Absolutely.
have this right. I printed out all those recent articles that I wrote on this. And this is the one that gets me. The guy's name was Namja Sharif. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is a writer for Teen Vogue and other magazines. When October 7th happened, here's what he tweeted. What did you all think decolonization meant? Vibes, papers, essays, losers. That tweet was liked about 100,000 times just in the
Mhm.
first 24 hours. And
Mhm.
this is my concern. This is what I've been trying to wake people up about from a number of different angles, but because I think it's all tied in together. This fad with so-called decolonization, there's this ideology called settler colonialism.
Mhm.
That's supposedly what you and I are guilty of, that they're teaching the kids about in the
Yeah.
schools, settler colonialism. And all the arguments that are made against the state of Israel, that it was some sort of false entity that was just dropped on the Middle East in 1948, that the people don't belong there, they have to leave. Well, they make those same arguments against the United States of America now.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The anti Christopher Columbus vogue in 1492, that what happened there was a genocide. Everything is genocide. The
Mhm.
people who talk so much about genocide, Simone, are setting us up for a genocide.
Yes, they are. Yep.
What they did to the Jews on October 7th in Israel, they want to do to all of us. They would
Yeah.
do it to us in the United States of America if they could. I think that's what they're setting us up for, frankly. I think that's what the
Mhm.
anti-Christopher Columbus thing is about.
Yep.
I think that's what the decolonization ideology that they feed all the kids in the schools today is about. I think that's what the so-called land acknowledgments are about, that some college president will give before going on with the convocation or whatever. I think the 1619 Project,
Mhm.
which argued that the United States did not really begin on the 4th of July. It began with the first slave in 1619. Critical race theory, the whole idea of all of humanity and history is to be seen through the prism of oppressor versus oppressed. Everything can be boiled down to that. You're either one or the other. All of this is setting us up for something horrible. And what you just saw a year and a half ago or more at this point on October 7th, is that's the future that they intend for all of us. And look, I think a person can read
That's
all
also
these.
that's not paranoid. That is true. That is true.
They don't hide it. They kind of say it.
Yeah. I don't know
So
when people will believe, but
yeah,
they do say it. I met the parents of the remaining hostages, some of the parents of the remaining hostages. And one of the dads, the moms could not make eye contact. The dads, it was so brutal, so painful. Anyways, one of the dads said what you said basically. He said, if you don't care, there will come a time when you cannot escape what will happen to Europe and to the West, to America. And you're right, they don't hide it. So this is something my Middle Eastern Christian family clearly understands. I wish more Westerners would understand everything that you just said, and I hope whoever's listening will look into it if they need more investigation. But this is very obvious to people who are not in the West,
And I'll tell you, and I read those articles in the Catholic press. There is no anti-Palestinian thing in the Catholic press. Maybe in the evangelical world, it just doesn't exist.
It's not not at all. Not at
Yeah.
all. Not at
So,
all.
but I'll tell you this, and again, I think there's two different things going on here. There's the Gaza war itself, and then there's the repercussions and what it means for the West and for us here in North America and in Europe as well. And I read all those articles in the Catholic press by multiple authors, and I think reasonable people can come down on different sides. I understand that. I appreciate that. It's a big, complicated mess that goes back a lot of years. But here's something I will say. Even if like your primary sympathy is with the Palestinians, Israel's a regional superpower. It looks like a lopsided fight to you. The Palestinians are suffering disproportionately. Even if you feel that way, Israel or Zionism or whoever you have identified as the enemy is not going to come over here in North America and kill you. I mean, they have limited goals. You may disagree with the policies of Mr. Netanyahu or the Israeli government or even the very existence of the state of Israel itself. But those things are not going to come over here to the United States and hurt you. The enemies of the state of Israel, the people who hate the Jews, for the reasons I just gave, the dots I just connected, they want to get you too. Yeah. And I think people need to be aware of that.
To believe them when they say that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for being so eloquent in expressing all of that. I just want to bring people back to and I think I've told you this before, Peter, in one of our chats about, before entering this space at all, I've always been concerned about the church being less mystical and more activist, more obsessed with politics and less with our culture and spirituality and faith, and seeing things through the lens of the mystical body of Christ as opposed to like the political lens. And this is now the ramifications of being a hyper political society and church are, taking its toll when it comes to this issue. But, when there's an examination of conscience on like where the heart is with the Jewish people in Israel, this is Jesus's family, right? Spiritually, our church teaches we are Semites, as our popes have taught us. We are taught to have a preferential option, you could say, for the Jewish people and faith. And as you mentioned so well, we are seen as one, even if Jews don't always like Christians or Christians don't always like Jews, but we are seen from our enemies as as a part of the same piece, which is actually how St. Paul talks about it. We're grafted on to Israel. I just, yeah, that's what I'm worried about. That's what.
I've always been. Again, I grew up after the Second World War, after the Second Vatican Council. So it seemed like
we were
a lot
past
of this
moment.
Yeah. It was frankly kind of mystifying to me growing up and reading in the history books about anti-Semitism, and particularly about Christian anti-Semitism, because it seemed to like cut off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah. So
in
true.
the family I grew up in, and this may be to the credit of my grandmother, to whom I owe much of my Catholic faith. She filled in all the gaps that were left by, frankly, an inadequate religious education from the churches in the 70s and 80s. But
Right.
she always, I mean, my maternal grandparents loved my they couldn't love my dad enough. They were crazy about my
Oh,
dad. And my parents
sweet.
divorced in the 80s, and they continued to love the guy. I mean, the bond there was really tight.
So
And when my
sweet.
grandmother was teaching me the Bible growing up, teaching me about the faith, the saints, she always emphasized the connection between Judaism and Catholicism specifically. I was told when I was little,
Wow.
you're very lucky to be both Catholic and Jewish, because
You're like
you're
double chosen.
yeah, you're one of she had a deep Marian spirituality. She said you're one of the
Oh,
chosen people, and you belong to the church that believes in Mary, that most venerates and honors the Blessed Virgin Mary. And those
yeah.
were the two things that
What a great grandmother. My
yeah,
gosh.
that combination kind of stayed with me.
She's
So
like, "You do have a Jewish mom, Peter." Poor lady.
right,
Oh, that's so sweet. Why
but
was she like that? What was where how did she get influenced that way?
my grandmother, oh, she
Yeah.
was an extraordinary woman. Alice Pinto, she just died a few months ago at the age of
Oh,
96.
oh, God bless
Um,
her. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
she was Portuguese American from New Bedford, Massachusetts, big Portuguese community in New Bedford. My grandfather in the 1940s, in 1914, was this dashing young immigrant from Portugal who swept my grandmother off her feet. They got married. He went off and served his country in the Second World War, became a naturalized American
Beautiful.
citizen, and they were the greatest generation. They were the World War
Right,
II generation,
right.
and that I want to say it was that milieu of Portuguese Catholicism in New Bedford. But they also instilled in me, particularly a devotion she did to Our Lady of Fatima. My grandfather, I get my American patriotism from him. He had a great love of the United States of America and of Christopher Columbus, whom he insisted was Portuguese. I don't know if that's
I
true, but
mean,
why not? Um, but
I love that. That's hilarious.
my grandmother actually came to the faith on her own, even though she was Portuguese. I know, like, she actually grew up in a fairly, and my great grandmother lived to be 98, lived into my 30s. But my grandmother grew up in a relatively secular home, and she had a longing for God herself when she was a teenager. She was running around with the Jehovah's Witnesses for a while, but she found her way to the Catholic Church, back to the faith of her own ancestors, and she credited the Eucharist. She said it was the Eucharist that
Oh,
drew her in,
wow.
and her faith. Man, I've been going through her spiritual books since she died. All the underlinings and the
Oh,
notes she wrote in the margins. Her faith was amazing. It was very unusual for someone of her generation how deeply, deeply rooted she was in the scripture and all the different books of the Bible, which she taught to me from a young age. And
wow.
I mean, really, ultimately, the answer to your question is grace, right? It
Yeah, I
wasn't
was gonna
her.
say
It
that this
was,
is all I'm thinking. I mean, this is so beautiful.
yeah.
And with the spiritual legacy that she has left from her faith is unbelievable. The
So
femininity.
being a Portuguese Catholic and an Ashkenazi Jew at the same time, and apart from my two brothers, apart from my family, I don't know that there's another person on earth with that unusual combination. But it just kind of led me to the place where I'm at, where I am Catholic. As we say at the Easter Vigil, I believe in and profess and hold to be true everything that the Catholic Church does. And to your point, I am a political animal. I mean, I'm sitting here in the Family Institute of Connecticut, and I do politics, or a version of politics, for a living. I'm a social conservative activist, and it's deeply intertwined with my Catholic faith. But to your point, it has to be rooted in something
It's be
deeper. Yeah,
exactly. For political fruitfulness, it has to be rooted properly in faith and culture. And first things first.
yeah.
And that I feel I think that's my passion, to be honest, is, when we talk about the sin of anti-Semitism, a mortal sin that will endanger your soul, right?
Yeah.
That's the first thing. I mean, we don't, and to your earlier point about there isn't, I mean, maybe that one guy on your social media that goes too far with the Palestinians, but that's just really not a problem in our church.
No.
And
You know,
it's just not. So when I bring up anti-Semitism in the church, the immediate thought and words out of someone's mouth ought not to be the Palestinians. It ought to be, wow, that's a legitimate evil that we need to take care of immediately.
do you notice that how quickly they change the subject and how
Yeah.
they don't want to talk about October 7th? There's another quote here I want to read to you from
Sure.
that article that I wrote last October on the first anniversary of October 7th. And I was telling you what a political animal I am, right? I'm
Yeah.
a man of the right. I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
I'm
You're a
particularly,
traditional on the
yeah,
right Catholic
social
guy. Yeah.
conservative guy. I'm one of those. I'm a culture warrior.
Yeah. Yeah.
Governor Ned Lamont here in Connecticut, he and I are not exactly best friends. He's a progressive Democrat. We disagree about a lot of things. But he said, I thought the most profound one or two liner on this. There was some event, you remember, earlier this year, or maybe it was early last year. It was January. No, it would have been January 10th of last year, that the pro-Palestinian protesters, as the media calls them, they like to crash particularly a lot of Democrat events.
Yeah.
Biden was still in charge at the time, and they wanted to shake down the Democrats and get them off their support from Israel. This is a quote from Ned Lamont responding to the protesters. I thought it was one of the best things anyone said. Lamont writes, or he said out loud, they have a right, they, meaning the pro-Palestinian protesters, they have a right to protest. But I'll tell you something, nobody's going to listen to them unless they lead off with the fact that they acknowledge and condemn the brutal, sadistic, genocidal attack of October 7th and what it did to all those innocent civilians. That's exactly right. You got to lead off with that.
Amazing. See, there's friendship potential for people that we never.
Well, I always say we have no forever enemies. I mean, we've had.
No, we don't. We don't. Yeah.
I mean,
There's.
one of the most progressive liberal Democrats in the state legislature one year was the deciding vote to kill assisted suicide. So, and we appreciate that. So, yeah, I mean, you never know where you're going to make friends. But look, when I call them like I see them. When someone's right, they're right. And I think Ned Lamont absolutely nailed what's wrong with a lot of these protests with one line. And again, good people can be on opposite sides of, do we agree or disagree with this or that policy of Netanyahu or Israel or how they're prosecuting this war? I get that. But I also think there's some bedrock facts as to why we're in this war in the first place. Some humanitarian principles that need to be stated over and over again. And when you're always trying to change the subject, that's a little strange. I'll tell you what else too.
Yeah.
So let's get to this, right? We're talking about, we don't see anti-Palestinian stuff nearly at all in Catholic circles. What we see, frankly, is kind of some anti-Semitic stuff, particularly online. So this is sometimes worded in a certain way where, you'll log on and you'll be like, well, my problem with Zionism is blah, 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 blah. I think Chuck Schumer spoke to this very eloquently in an interview. And again, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate, probably not someone who I would agree with on a lot, but he gave an interview to the New York Times Magazine a few months ago that his quotes on this I thought were absolutely perfect. And he made all the proper distinctions. No, you're not an anti-Semite just for disagreeing with Israeli policy or with Netanyahu. Schumer
just
does
so we
himself.
have a firm grasp on the obvious.
Yeah. But he says, look, a lot of this anti-Zionism stuff, it does shade over into anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when people are saying you Zionists, what they mean is you Jews. And he gave examples. I guess he wrote a book on this. But he gave examples recently since October 7th of a bunch of pro-Palestinian protesters showing up in the subway and saying, a subway car and saying, all you Zionists, get off the subway, or attacking some, shades of 1930s Germany, attacking some Jewish bakery in New York City. That bakery has nothing to do with Zionism or
And that
Israel.
happened in DC. The one kosher restaurant, or one of two kosher restaurants in DC, which has nothing to do with anything over there except that it's kosher and Jewish, was vandalized.
So here's the problem I have with what I see on the Catholic end of my news feed. I'm talking about people I know personally on my
Yeah,
Facebook
same.
and elsewhere,
Yep.
where they'll run down Zionism, like my problem with Zionism is blah 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 blah. I'm against Zionism, blah 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 blah. Well, here's the thing, okay? Zionism is not hypothetical. There's an actual country called Israel that
Yeah.
has and we can, you don't have to be Ted Cruz and say, well, it's, the modern state of Israel is identical with the biblical kingdom, and I learned that in Sunday school,
I
so there. You don't have to believe in any of
I
that.
told some rabbis that recently. I was like, listen, if you pick up on a Catholic allergy to the word Zionism, it's not because Catholics aren't pro-Jewish or Israel. It's because we don't want to be confused with Ted Cruz
Right?
theology.
Well,
That's it.
that's a totally reasonable concern, frankly.
Yeah, right.
Because that sort of rhetoric does control too much discourse on the right.
Yeah.
And it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
But look, when I'm on my Facebook and people are complaining about Zionism, here's the problem here. Zionism is not a hypothesis. It's not like there's an actual country called Israel, the modern
Right.
state of Israel, that has existed on a piece of land for almost 80 years now. And
Mhm.
so when you if that were not the case, if we were having this conversation in 1925 instead of 2025, and you said, gee, here's why I don't like Zionism, I think I could get it, because then it's more like a
thing that like something on the table, but this is not on the table. Israel's not going anywhere.
So when you say you're against Zionism, what you're saying, like, the thing already exists. What you're saying is you want it wiped away.
Yeah, right.
You want it wiped off the map. And sometimes they won't come right out and say that. Like, if you draw out the implications of what they're saying, oh, no, that's not what I'm saying. But along with Chuck Schumer, I gotta say, this stuff shades over, and it really looks to me like that's what they're saying. And they will make distinctions about, I'm against Zionism, but I'm not against the Jews, or I'm against the state of Israel or Israeli policy, but I'm not against the Jews. Those are fine distinctions. They can be made. Schumer thinks so. I think so. I have to say, as it is actually lived out in practice and spoken, it seems to me like those lines get crossed an awful lot. And a lot of times it does seem like it's window dressing for some deeper, uglier thing that has always been there, that I thought disappeared in my lifetime, that since October 7th of all things has come back.
Of
Like,
all things. How
you react to October 7th by becoming hostile to the Jews, I don't know, but that's where we're at.
Right. And you know that I moderated a panel at the International Religious Freedom Summit on a documentary on the sexual violence perpetuated against women on 10/7, which is, if you just look at that alone, besides all the other stuff, it horrifying to your core, which we have not talked about that hardly at all in church circles.
Well, the closest you get, and forgive me for the gallows humor, but is like Babylon Bee articles like Bill Cosby identifies as Hamas so that the left will back him, or what's his Harvey Weinstein. Yeah. I mean, it's bad.
I brought up this. I'm glad you said all that also, because when I first started working in this space, I asked a genuine question of, why are we talking about Zionism at all? Isn't Israel already a country? Like, I was I'm confused. It's already fulfilled its end. Isn't it now over? And we just talk about Israel.
When you talk about Zionism as a bad thing that needs to be gotten rid of, what you're talking about is getting rid of a country that's already there with tens of millions of people, or 10 million, I think, an already existing country.
Right. So I'm glad you said that, because I thought, am I missing something? But why is this a movement we have to keep feeding? Oh, that's why. Because
this is an old Soviet propaganda thing that unfortunately has lived on, that you turn Zionism into a swear word. Zionism is racism. Calling someone a Zionist is like saying they're a Klansman or whatever. I got to tell you, as a veteran of decades of fighting certain aspects of the social left, we were the group that led the fight for traditional marriage here in Connecticut 25 years ago. I'm used to this. These tactics are
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah.
This way
Yeah.
of marginalizing and saying, unless you think like me, if you dare to disagree with me, you're a bigot, and we're going to write you out of polite conversation altogether and cancel you and run you out of town on a rail. People who normally recognize and oppose cancel culture actually do the same thing with that word Zionism, it seems
Yeah.
to me.
I was trying to relate to it with the word feminism because I mean John Paul II used feminism and a feminist, but I didn't want to ever be confused with any woman who's pro-choice. So I would never use the word.
Yeah.
But now with the Zionist thing, I'm like, maybe I'll be misunderstood, but maybe it'll be a conversation starter to clarify. But and a lot of Catholic women I've been talking to who also were like, even Pope St. John Paul II, who I love, couldn't get me to use the word feminist, are now like, maybe I'll start using it and just, not worry about the connotations or ways in which I might be
Well,
misunderstood.
words are so important here.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're all living in an Orwell novel where
Yeah.
words have become their opposite. Like, I mean, that the Jews of all
Yes.
people are
Yes.
being accused of genocide. Uh, I mean,
Yeah.
the word genocide was actually invented because of the Shoah, because of the Holocaust. And
And the
now,
Armenians, and the
yeah.
Armenians.
What's that?
Don't forget the Armenians.
Oh, excuse me. The Armenians. Well,
Yeah.
let me ask you. Certainly, the first genocide and the
Yep.
huge one, the biggest one of the 20th century, was the Armenians in about 1915 or so. Did the
Mhm.
actual English word genocide come into being after that, or was it
It
in the
came after
Nuremberg?
it came after the Armenian genocide. Lemkin, who's a Polish jurist, I think Jewish, I think coined it because of what happened to the Armenians and then also later the Holocaust. But yeah, I mean, yeah, just to connect those two, it was actually my Jewish friends in Los Angeles who were the only ones who really knew about the Armenian
Yeah.
genocide and who like promoted it. And Hitler is famously known for saying we could get away with the Holocaust, the Shoah, because who remembers the Armenians?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
well, okay, I could talk to you forever, Peter. You're a very interesting man. Any final or concluding thoughts of like what you would want? Where do you want to see the church go in this like moment?
Uh, my greatest wish when it comes to this topic would be for the church to rediscover um, the wisdom of Joseph Ratzinger,
Yeah.
who, I mean, talk about fine distinctions and nailing it and getting
Mhm.
it exactly right. And I don't think his brilliance, at least in our lifetime in modern times, has been surpassed. And after I wrote that one of the articles against the new anti-Semitism for CatholicCulture.org, I was invited. Well, I got attacked by some of the folks we're talking about online, and there's
It's like join me, Peter. Join the club. Join the club.
there's a Jewish group in West Hartford. In fact,
I
this
love this happened. This is beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're called Run for Their Lives, which actually is the same group that got attacked by the Molotov cocktail guy in Colorado a few months later.
Ugh.
That event occurs around the country. The West Hartford chapter of Run for Their Lives, which is a group of Jewish people and the friends of the Jews. Anyone can go. A group of Jewish people. They had about 90 the other day that gather every Sunday morning in a location in West Hartford to do a walk to remember the hostages in Gaza, that they not be forgotten.
Forgotten.
And
Yeah.
Ari, I'm probably
Ari.
mispronouncing his name. Ari, the guy who organizes it, he reached out to me because he saw the articles I wrote
So
defending the
great.
Jews. He saw how I had been attacked for it, and they wanted to thank me. And
Ugh.
so they invited me to speak one morning, and this was before the Colorado incident. They invited me to speak one morning in West Hartford. I was greatly honored to do that. And then after that, all sorts of new connections. And again, Family Institute is an ecumenical organization. We speak for Catholics and evangelicals and others as well, Eastern Orthodox, Mormons, you name it, anyone who shares our values. But our connections to the Jewish community seem to be growing. In fact, one of our best friends in the Jewish community in the Hartford area, died recently. He was one of the best guys against assisted suicide. Brilliant man, devout
Amazing.
Orthodox Jew named Stephen Mendelson. He was the one Simone, who turned me on to the Philos Project after I wrote one of those articles.
Wow.
He sent me a video of you denouncing Catholic anti-Semitism,
Oh my
and
gosh.
he died just about a month ago. He was
Oh,
this guy. There's one of the Jewish holidays. It begins with an S. I can't pronounce it, but it's this festive day that was occurring around June 1st, where you stay up all night in synagogues studying Torah. This guy was walking. Stephen Mendelson was walking the 2 hours from his condo, his apartment in New Britain, to his synagogue in West Hartford, and he was excited. The 2 hours were just prelude, walking the 2 hours to his synagogue so that he could stay up all night studying Torah.
oh my
And
gosh.
unfortunately, at a busy intersection, he was hit and killed
Ugh,
by a car.
ugh,
Um, but he was
brutal.
the one who kept me connected to the Jewish community. I don't know. This is all part of
What a
God's plan.
truly, it's so providential, and, like, I'm so sorry for
Yeah.
his
But
loss. May his memory be a blessing, but it is providential. Everything about this moment to me in the life of the church and the world feels prophetic and providential.
So, yes, absolutely. So, I was invited to speak at the West Hartford Run for Their Lives, and out of that, there's a group of Jewish conservatives, political conservatives, in West Hartford that invited me to speak to one of their regular gatherings. And what I did was,
Awesome.
when I think of Joseph Ratzinger, there's like his Joseph Ratzinger phase, his Pope Benedict phase, and then his Pope Emeritus phase. There's like
Mhm.
three Ratzingers, but even in his Pope Emeritus phase, he wrote this fantastic article for the theological journal Communio about, I don't have the title of the article, it was about 2018, where
Such
he
a
was,
good document.
yeah,
Such a good
I
document.
boned up on that thing because I got questions about the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. And you know, Ratzinger walks a very fine line in this article, as he always does, right? The hermeneutic of continuity. There was no one alive when he was alive or since that I think could better stitch it all together and have it all make sense without in any way repudiating magisterial teaching. But he really lays out what the relationship is between Christianity and Judaism, and it's not a closed document. It's sort of an
That's what
open-ended.
I love about him. He's a
Yeah.
true theologian because he's so nuanced, he's so precise. He maintains the mystery of theology without at all betraying
Yeah.
magisterial teaching. But then, and I think it's because he's prophetic, he leaves the question open for the
Yeah.
work that has to be done in thought and prayer, theology on our knees about our relationship with the Jewish people. We are just at the beginning of it,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think Ratzinger thought so too. And so
Yeah.
he left it open ended. He wasn't like, okay, here's what it is, end of story, black letter law. Here's what Ratzinger says. He's like, look, here's the state of the question now. Here's where we've come from. Here's where I think things are right now. Here are the things to explore going forward.
Mhm.
And so how do you balance this idea that pops up throughout Christian theology about the church as a new Israel, but you don't want to go too far into the replacement theology? How do you balance that with Romans 9 through 11, the never revoked covenant? How do you make it all work? And he
Right.
talks about how, well, if you look at Genesis and the Old Testament, we don't speak of just one covenant. There's several covenants. I can't summarize it, but this goes to the question I think you put to me was this, what's my hope for the future of Catholic Jewish relations? And that my hope is that it be as deeply rooted as possible in the legacy of Joseph Ratzinger and Pope St. John Paul II. I think those two men reached the absolute pinnacle
Uh-huh.
of where we have been so far in that relationship. And there's some really tragic historical circumstances that made John Paul II and Ratzinger possible in the first place. I think you had to be on the other side of Auschwitz, unfortunately, for us to even have this conversation. But it's
Absolutely,
but it's a
sadly.
conversation that's been being had for decades now, and to have October 7th of all things and the reaction to it somehow wipe it all away and set us back 100 years or further is crazy. What we need to do is dig in deeper to JP2 and Ratzinger and somehow further their project in
Yes.
a way that I think is faithful to them and their wisdom.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Peter. The heart of John Paul II, the witness of John Paul II, the spirit of John Paul II, and the theological brilliance and prophetic impulse of Pope Benedict. I think those two were good. We're good to pave the way forward with those guys as our touchstones for sure.
And I think the Philos Project does that and did that very well with that conference that you referenced about Catholicism and Catholic anti-Semitism. I think that was great. That's what we need is more stuff like that. And I know you've had videos, diving into this stuff, the substitution or replacement theology versus can there be even a Catholic Zionism that you guys have chewed all this over.
Yes. So if you're listening to this and you'd like to make a donation to Philos Catholic, feel free, because we do have a great demand in this moment. More and more Catholics are noticing and worried, especially parents, who are, like, wait a minute, why are my kids going off to college and I raised them traditional Catholics and now they're drinking Hamas Kool-Aid, unwittingly. But yes, so thank you so much, Peter, for your work, your witness, for the glory of God and the kingdom of God. And I'm so grateful for your friendship and all that you've, helped us with here at Philos Catholic, and look forward to more. So thank you.
Thank you, Simone.
If this episode was helpful for you, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a rating and review to help us spread the word, and donating at philosproject.org/give with the comment Catholic to support this podcast. To learn more about becoming a Christian leader in the Near East, check out our Pathfinder free online courses, also on our website. Thanks for listening. See you next week.